Thank you for joining us today on 10 Minutes with the Artist, a discussion about the art practice and the personal vision that guides artists. On today's episode, we're very proud to have Anne Argenziano, who is completing a thesis in architecture at North Dakota State University. We invited her here today to speak about her research and the creation of artifacts in preparation for her defense. Simple Nurture explores continuity and connection between generations. Anne's artifact touches on issues of identity, tradition, and systems through the overarching lens of motherhood. Simple Nurture takes a step back to consider humanity, not as some random patchwork, but a well-designed, integrated, and equitable form that connects us all. I'm Anthony Ferris, and this is 10 Minutes. So thank you so very much, Anne, for joining us on 10 Minutes with the Artist.
Yeah.
So when I think about your work, I think about how your artifact deals with generations, not necessarily with population.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about how for centuries, there was a great number of children who died in their childhood. And I was wondering how that affects women and generations and continuity.
Well, I think it affects women partially in their morale throughout the generations. Obviously, now it isn't as big of a problem, but it still is enough of a problem that many women today do have to deal with their children dying. But I think also it affected women in that it made them almost a little more numb to their children dying. It also affected how many children they had, because many families had a lot more children in anticipation that their children would die. And I don't know if that affected the women themselves in their feeling that they were needed to produce more, or if that was something that they felt that they wanted to do so that they wouldn't have to feel as much pain when one child died.
So when we're viewing the idea of generations, do we think about the people who survived, or do we ever consider the people who we've lost?
I think both, but I think in the bigger picture, we tend to think of the people who survived. I have heard about survivor's bias, where we think about how people survived in the past, but we ignore the fact that many people did die, which is why we don't realize the problems that they had, because they just outright didn't survive different problems we had throughout history. So yeah, there definitely is a bit of both, the focusing on the people who survive or the people who die. It depends on who you are and what problems you're looking at.
You have this beautiful conversation about the Celtic knot.
Yes.
And its strength. And I'm kind of interested in the reality of things, though, because like when you were like moving this piece, little parts would become untangled, and then you would have to have like a little intimate experience where you are weaving it back together. I know that wasn't necessarily part of the metaphor of mending, but how does that little moment maybe address a premise of strength among generations?
You mean the moment of putting it back together?
Yes, and the fact that, like there were little breaks, but you didn't give up on it, that you continued to remend.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the fact that everyone has a little bit of brokenness in them. And even just the process of moving my artifact from one location to another, or just letting it sit for long enough, forces the bonds to become loose. But I can still go back in there and bring it back together. And that speaks to the strength of people and to the fact that people can mend themselves and are able to grow. And with the connection between myself and my artifact, it was kind of a moment of meditation, almost going in there and working with the artifact, like hands-on. It was a moment for me to reconnect with it and have this new understanding of it.
There was a time, I think, when people could recount the generations that came before. And I know that there's a resurgence in interest in genealogy, but I can only name my grandparents. So there's been a loss of information. Maybe it's still in documents, and there may still be people who are connected. But is there a threat of a disappearing connection among generations?
I've heard that you have about 3 generations before you disappear, which really terrifies me. I think that recently, yeah, you make a good point about not having that connection that we used to. I've recently been doing the Bible in a Year with Father Mike Schmitz, and they talk about all of the generations of people between different moments in time. And I realized that they had to remember that orally, because this wasn't written down until long after they were telling these stories. And that's not something I really have thought about recently. And it isn't exactly something that I thought about with my artifact. Because when it came to my artifact, I just was thinking of all the unnamed women who have led us to where we are, even though we may not know who they are. We just know that they were women who guided women. And because of that, they still are important, even if we don't know who they are.
In your paper, you talk about the artifact being like a net, and I was wondering if we can best understand your artifact through the lens of like Judeo-Christian ideology.
Mm-hmm. Would you mind expanding on that a little bit?
Well, the net is sort of an important metaphor in thinking about sort of Christianity. And I was just wondering whether or not your work had to deal with sort of any specific religious like ideology, or if it was a little bit broader and thought about generations as being separated from, say, culture.
Okay. I'm Catholic. So a lot of my work has to deal with the fact that I am Catholic. And just because with that being the way I was raised, that's the way I think. And usually things just tie back in here without me thinking about it. But I would say it also has a secular background. It has both the idea just of women in general and generations, but also this idea of, well, I focused on it being the gap between 0 AD, the beginning of the Christian era, when I could have just picked any moment in time. But for me, like, that is a very important moment in time. And I related it back to Mary and her cousin, Elizabeth, and them having their children. So it basically starts with Mary and Elizabeth and comes to now. And then in that moment, it also talks about their relationship with each other. So I suppose you could say it has something to do with the relationship between people within their own cultures. But additionally, it also has to do with people in any culture, or I suppose, yeah, any background.
So at the end of our interview, we like to ask a couple of questions about sort of your personal sort of creativity and sort of work ethic. So what time of day do you feel like you are most creative?
I guess I don't know if I have a specific time of day. I usually end up scrolling through Pinterest before I fall asleep at night. And that's when I feel like I get the most inspiration from things. That's the time when I don't want to write them down or sketch them out, but I get a lot of inspiration at that time. And I think I feel the most creative. Oh, I'm gonna have to think about this. Maybe in the morning, which might be why I've been struggling this semester, because being on Zoom, it's hard to wake up in the morning, and I've been having a hard time coming up with ideas. And I think it's because I don't have to get up in the morning.
Do you listen to any particular type of music or radio while you're working?
Yes, it depends on the semester. I actually have a list of songs from every semester. So if I listen to a certain genre or one specific song, it brings me back to a project I was working on at that time. This semester, it has been The Salt and the Sea by the Lumineers. And then last semester, it was Lemon Boy by Cavetown. So it's been all over the place. It's ranged from like kind of light indie to emo throughout the past 5 years.
Are you reading anything right now?
Currently, no. I would like to be. I started the semester reading An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. And that did lead me, it led me with a different worldview, I guess. So I've been looking at social media differently. I don't know if that's really been impacting my process. But it is different because usually I am reading throughout the semester, and this semester I'm just kind of left with what I started with at the beginning.
Yeah. What would you say is the most challenging thing about working in the medium that you're working in for your artifact?
I think using wood and yarn, using the 3D, the laser cutter, but bring it into a 3D medium. I think, well, there's a limitation of the hardboard itself. It's rather weak. I've had to replace a lot of the pieces. And the crochet took a lot of man hours. It wasn't just me working on it. I had a few people helping me with it. And part of the struggle with it was that once I finished it, I didn't want to go back and change anything. I was lucky that I had a really strong background in it. Like, I had done my work before I actually made it. So I didn't need to go back and make major changes. But there's just those inherent weaknesses to the material itself, and that kind of led to some struggles in creating it.
And then I guess my last question would be, what's next for you?
You mean like for the semester or moving on?
Well, once you finish the semester.
Well, I'm getting married in June, and then I don't know. I'm waiting to hear back from a lot of firms right now, but it's still early, so I don't know. It could be anything.
Good luck, and
Thank you.
thank you so very much for joining us today. And thank you also very much for joining us at home. And everybody, please make sure that you keep creating. So thank you, Anne, and appreciate it.